Well, today we have a really special guest, someone who's really been making a lot of waves, introducing the topic of the danger of seed oils, understanding how nutrition plays such a pivotal role in our health and in challenging the diseases of civilization. Uh, we have Dr. Cate Shanahan with us. She's a leading authority on nutrition and human metabolism, a board certified family physician with over 20 years of clinical experience, and a New York Times best-selling author of several books, including the latest, The FatBurn Fix. I'm looking at your website, and you've got endorsements from the late Kobe Bryant and Dwight Howard and all kinds of really phenomenal athletes and different folks. So it's a real great pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, David. I'm looking forward to our conversation very much.
Yeah, and before we started, we said, man, it feels like we become a broken record when seed oils has such a recurring link to so many of the issues that we're dealing with in disease today. It's almost hard to know where to start.
It truly is. They are the missing link in explaining metabolic disease, though. And that's why I have become somewhat of that broken record when people ask me, like, what about this problem? We were just talking about like protecting your hearing. And, if you avoid those seed oils, then it helps to protect these little things in our ears called hair cells from damage from too much vibration and shaking around. That's literally what causes age-related hearing damage. And the seed oils facilitate the damage, and avoiding them keeps your hearing better. It's
Wow.
crazy. All the different parts of our body that will just function better and last so much longer when we don't poison ourselves.
So
Crazy,
those
huh?
seed oils that are they causing the hairs to be kind of brittle in the ear is that what's happening, or unstable, the fats there?
I'm not sure exactly what happens to the hair cells themselves, but what I do know is that, like, the role of inflammation is
Mhm.
key here. And so when you hear a really loud sound, like if you're hunting, someone shoots a gun too close, or if you go to listen to a concert, you have that buzzing in your ears, that is caused by inflammation in your ears from just, it's kind of like an overworked muscle. So the little hair cells that normally stand up straight and tall, like maybe the 5 o'clock shadow, instead of being like straight and tall, they're like all bent over and sad, like trees after a hurricane, and they have to recover. And nobody's really seen how that happens, but we do know inflammation plays a role in the prolonged state of damage of being all broken up.
And I would imagine, I'm just throwing this out here, that maybe there's a connection with that and hair loss, or is that a whole nother topic
That's a whole different topic. Absolutely, whole different topic. But it does all boil down to oxidative stress, which causes inflammation. And the seed oils are oxidative stress in a bottle, almost literally. And so that is what drives inflammation. And inflammation is really what's driving our metabolic disease, our obesity, our chronic disease epidemics. Really everything I was dealing with as a doctor, a young doctor working in Hawaii, decades ago now, when I was kind of, jaded about the utility of what I was doing every day, like prescribing medications that didn't seem to make anyone feel better or not go to the hospital. So it was a big missing link for me. I mean, truly it was, a huge aha moment when I came to understand how these things affect our physiology at the cellular level. It was just like, oh my, okay, well, that explains so much.
Yes. Now, when was that aha moment that you had for the seed oil topic?
It was way back in like 2002 or 2001 or something like that. It was kind of inspired by a colleague of mine that I was working with. I was in Hawaii at the time, and a lot of things happened to me in Hawaii. It's really a great place to learn. I learned so much there. But so in 2001 or so, I was working in a clinic as a family medicine doctor, and a colleague of mine was sitting at her desk with charts. Like we had paper charts back in the day. And this one patient of hers, she had about 6 charts that totaled a stack of almost a foot tall of this one woman who was in the hospital, and she had been on the phone, like trying to figure out what to order for this woman who had heart failure and kidney failure and was bloated full of fluids. Her body was bloated with fluids. Her blood sugars were like ridiculously high. She couldn't get them to come down. And she got off the phone after this long and stressful conversation with, I don't know if it was a nurse or the family, and she had her head in her hands. And she was like, it's like no cells in this woman's body are working properly. And that phrase stuck in my head. And I came across like later, not much later, I myself had like a health problem, and to like really heal myself, I had to resort basically to nutrition and getting off of sugars and radically changing my diet, understanding what a real human diet really is. But part of that key thing was something that I read online in like 2001. It was a PhD dissertation by this woman named Eva Sodergren from Uppsala University. I think it's in Sweden. And it was entitled Lipid Peroxidation in Vivo. And so lipid means fat. Peroxidation refers to the reacting with oxygen and causing oxidative stress. And in vivo means in the body. And it was a PhD dissertation that was kind of summarizing all of the evidence that this is very relevant to human health, right? Lipid peroxidation was known to be a problem by the people who manufacture vegetable oils, because they measure what happens after they measure what's in it before and after, and they know what goes into it, and they know that there's toxins on the way out. And the oil chemists have known for decades and decades, 150 years actually, that these things oxidize and it's bad. But it wasn't really clear that it was physiologically relevant to humans, and that was something that could happen in our bodies as well. And so this PhD dissertation was, my first introduction to that whole world of potential explanation for inflammatory diseases. And when I read it, and it was full of chemistry and chemical diagrams and just showing how these fatty acids that I had been eating, I had been, thinking were the healthy kinds of fatty acids, how they basically explode into almost like into very dangerous particles that are almost like radioactive particles inside our cell membranes. And just like, well, no wonder after decades of eating this stuff, our cells no longer work properly. Like, it was just like, well, that explains everything. And it took me many years to untangle exactly how you go from seed oils to obesity, right? And how do you go from it? Really quickly, I went from how do you go from seed oils to heart attacks, because that was really the first thing I needed to understand was, okay, so if these polyunsaturated fatty acids that the American Heart Association says we need to eat more of, if they're actually causing disease, then where do we stand with butter and saturated fat-rich foods? And so because those are supposed to be the bad ones for the sole reason that they cause heart attacks. So my first order of business was to try and drill down into what's really causing heart attacks here. And very quickly, I found the work of a amazing chemist in Germany named Gerhard Spitaler. He had over 140 publications on the topic of these polyunsaturated fatty acids and what do they do. And he had written at that time like 10 articles already about, hey folks, this stuff could be what's causing heart attacks, because what it does is it oxidizes your lipoprotein particles and they can't function. So they're going to build up in your arteries. I mean, he didn't say it exactly that way. I'm kind of summarizing and putting it together in a way that like, actually, I think really made sense. He had, 10 papers. So he was saying a lot of other things that were all very, very important for me to believe that what he was saying was true. And I had to kind of put it together in my own mind as like a cohesive, okay, so really what's going on is that these vehicles that deliver fatty acids and cholesterol through our bloodstream that are designed by nature for that task, They are destroyed when our diets are too high in polyunsaturated fatty acids, plain and simple. And so that was actually what was causing heart attacks. And it was just like such a crazy thing, because this was back in, so that I had kind of gotten all straight on my head about by 2003 or 4. And this, we're talking about like Google may not have even existed. Amazon did not deliver to Hawaii, and they only sold books. There was no keto community. There was nobody I could really dialogue with about, hey, does this make sense? My colleagues, they were kind of interested, but it was a lot of chemistry that they were not familiar with. And so, it was kind of like, okay, this seems like maybe there's something there, but I'm busy and I can't talk to people about their diet. So I don't know what they're eating or how relevant this even is.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really like isolated, and, but nevertheless, I guess my point is it took a lot for me to really get to over the hump that was in my way, this major barrier between me telling my patients what I thought a really healthy diet was, and where I had been educated, right? Because doctors are educated to tell people to avoid saturated fat and seek out polyunsaturated fatty acids. And it turns out that is the worst possible advice. So, I had to do a ton of research, and a lot of that made its way into my first book, Deep Nutrition, Why Your Genes Need Traditional Food. But there's just a ton more. There's like a lot that I had to investigate. There was no Facebook. So I had to do it all myself. And then finally, I became comfortable enough where I could say, okay, to my patients, don't eat canola, stop cooking with Wesson oil. And when you're cooking, just use butter or olive oil, or if you have it, the fat from the pigs that you've killed, because very, very much into hunting on the island of Kauai. And so people were very like capable of being self-sufficient and doing exactly what our ancestors did, for thousands and thousands of generations to get us here, which is why Hawaii had at that time a massively longer life expectancy than anywhere else in the United States by leaps and bounds. It was truly a blue zone, but it wasn't investigated by the blue zone's people.
Now, didn't they have the indigenous community of Hawaii suffered an obesity epidemic when they started eating these vegetable oils? Is that what happened?
Yes. So there were very few. They were such a tiny minority, probably less than 1% of the population. So most of my patients were like fractionally Hawaiian at the most. And instead, like really the truly majority came from all over Asia. So from the Philippines, from China, from Korea, from Japan. So I had the opportunity to learn, what does an Okinawan diet really look like? When the Blue Zones came out, the book Blue Zones came out and claimed that an Okinawan diet, Okinawa is one of the places that was studied in this book, The Blue Zones, where they talked about what does it take to be, what are the healthiest people on the planet, like based on longevity, what do they eat? So like the book's author described it as basically almost no meat, but that really was not true at all, because I was asking my patients, hey, what are you eating now? What do you guys eat back in Japan? It was the same stuff. It was very similar climate, so they could grow and eat very similar things. So that was tons of animal products, particularly fish, but even whatever they could get their hands on, whatever would grow in the environment. So pork, and a little bit of beef, because there weren't that many people that were growing that on Kauai or in Japan for a lot of Japan's history. But really the key to their longevity was the tradition, the adherence to traditions, and continuing to keep alive all the knowledge of how do you live off the land, that kind of self-sufficiency, which is really how we got here, right? I mean, we didn't have doctors handing down prescriptions. We didn't have McDonald's. We didn't have anything instant. We had to create nutrition, create health from the landscape. And that is really what I came to understand, is that transaction between what we feed our DNA, our genes inside every single cell in our body, that determines the health of every single cell and how functional it is. So food is way more than calories and stuff that I learned. Is more about, not just about macros and all that. That's just how we talk about it. But our DNA basically understands it as instructions on what is capable, what it should be capable of doing, and what is available. Can it grow? Can it create new bone? Can it build new muscle? Is it a good time to reproduce and have a child? So it articulates with our fertility, brain function, just everything. But it's about the quality of the food and how much information is in there, which comes from nature. So when food comes from a factory, like these seed oils do, that is the worst place to be getting our food from. But yet here in America, 66% of the average American's calories are coming from the most refined factory products, which are the seed oils, refined sugars, and refined flours. And so that is really a very simple way of looking at why are we sick. It's truly simple. It's that simple. What's complicated is what's sustaining the lies that keep doctors from really learning the truth about nutrition. That's politics and business and a lot of nasty business that's going on that miseducated me and continues to basically brainwash a lot of otherwise well-intentioned physicians and other folks in the health space.
So when we talk about vegetable oils or seed oils, we're talking about PUFAs, these polyunsaturated fatty acids, and that primarily is omega-3 and omega-6, right? And those, that you said something I saw in a recent interview with you that you were doing, and it made so much sense the way you said it. You said omega-3 and omega-6 oils are meant to be signaling molecules, not fuel. And I was like, wow, that's a great way. That really made it make way more sense once I saw, like, okay, so we're using something that's supposed to be telling us turn left, turn right, and we're using that as our fuel. That doesn't make any sense. We need, this is a car, you need gasoline for the car. That's a different fuel, which is what you're saying is the ancestral saturated fats and monounsaturated fats. But the PUFAs are meant to be our signaling technology, not fuel. And so when you are wiring a car in a way that doesn't make it work, you're going to have a lot of wrecks and you're going to have a lot of breakdowns, right?
100%. Yeah. So like what we learn is that fat is kind of all the same. Like if you have fat in your diet, it's these nasty things that are calories, and that your body fat is just full of calories that you're going to have to work so hard to burn off. It's just a nightmare. But the truth is that not all fat is created equal in terms of really anything. I mean, in terms of calories, they're pretty close. Actually, saturated fat per tablespoon of something like butter has a tiny bit fewer calories, 10% fewer than a tablespoon of something like an oil, like canola oil. So even in terms of calories, they're not equal, but they're radically different in terms of what our bodies can do with them, and really what our bodies are designed to do with them, which speaks to the design of our body fat. It is supposed to be primarily fuel storage, meaning fatty acids, because all of our fuel is stored as fatty acids in the form of triglycerides. So there's this thing called glycerol. But most of it's fatty acids. And these fatty acids are supposed to be the kinds that are excellent fuels for our cells. Right. And that is the saturated and the monounsaturated. And that's supposed to be the vast majority on a percentage basis of what you find when you biopsy a person's body fat. Somewhere around maybe 90, 95, maybe even like 98%, because that has been found in some populations, some human populations. And on a percentage basis, what's happening in the average American is that it's way less than that. It's actually, some people have like 25% of these PUFAs, meaning only 75% of the kind we can actually use. And some people have even more, up to 40%. And there was actually one study. 40% of your body fat made out of PUFA I mean, to talk about that and what that means,
Is that
um,
massive obesity when you're at that point? Is that, or is,
it doesn't have to be,
wow.
right? It
Okay.
can even be babies. Okay. And so this is very scary. What is it doing to our babies?
Hmm.
In fact, there was a study that showed that, there are babies who have 40% PUFA. No doubt, these are children who were fed canola oil based formula or some, soy oil based formula, not, healthy breast milk from a healthy mother. But yeah, so that alters the capacity of your cells to really do anything, because energy is necessary for every cell in your body to function normally. Your cells may have different requirements for protein and minerals, maybe, but every cell will die if it doesn't get energy. And when your body fat is composed of something that is not designed to give your cells energy, that will radically change your daily experience as a human being on planet Earth, because your body fat is the largest organ in your body. Even if you're not overweight, it probably weighs 30, 40 pounds. And of course, if you are overweight, it can weigh hundreds of pounds. And to have an organ that large that is constructed out of the wrong chemicals has extremely profound effects on your life and how you feel. And so it's no wonder that, the more that you have of it, kind of the worse you feel. But you do not have to be, overweight, even, not to mention obese, but you don't have to even be overweight. And you can still have way too much PUFA in your body fat to be healthy. And this was one of the things that when I was working with the Lakers, I was really driving home to the athletes, because they were like, oh, I can eat whatever I want, because my body composition is 8% and 8% body fat, right? I don't have to watch what I eat. Well, yes, you do, because if that 8% is not going to give you energy.
So you were talking about the LA Lakers. You had to show them that just because they're not getting obese from eating vegetable oil foods and so forth doesn't mean it's not doing a significant harm to their long-term health and even short-term health problems, right?
Absolutely. It was hurting their performance on a daily basis. So when had the opportunity to finally work very closely with one of the Lakers, Dwight Howard, and really kind of radically overhaul what he had been doing. He felt better than he had in years over the course of 2 weeks. And his performance at the time had really been kind of tanking, and it was causing a lot of friction on the team. And it was really sad and hard to watch, honestly, because people would throw him the ball, and it was like he had oven mitts on his hands, because he just didn't have that athlete's reflex. It would bounce off his fingertips. And so, it's just like, oh my God, how can this be somebody who's in the NBA? And so after 2 weeks, the headlines in the papers were saying Superman is back. I mean, it really impacts performance hugely to be forcing your cells to be burning these wrong kinds of fuels. And it's not just about the polyunsaturated fatty acid, it's also about the sugar, because when you have that much unusable fat in your, or unusable fuel really in your gas tank, your body has to turn to another fuel more often, which is sugar. And it makes you more dependent on sugar. It causes hypoglycemia episodes where your blood sugar is just a little bit too low, but you feel lousy because you're having an energy emergency. Your brain is not getting enough energy. And hypoglycemia causes things like headaches and jitteriness and shakiness and hangry and irritability and extreme hunger. And that experience is why people gain weight. Okay, so we're jumping over into from performance to obesity, if you like. You can do that. Like why some people gain weight and others don't when they're eating the same diet.
Well, yeah. Why is it that some people eat vegetable oils and they have the same genetic makeup as someone who also eats vegetable oils, same amount, and one person deals with obesity, the other person says I'm perfectly fine? What is that? Does that mean that their genetic makeup can handle and process these toxic levels of PUFA better than the person who is expressing obesity when they eat the same amount? Or does it mean that it's just it's not expressing itself as obesity, but it will express itself as just as many bad things other than obesity? Like, how does that shake out? Because a lot of people, the number one indicator they look for to see whether they're healthy or not is whether they have, excess weight. And if they don't, they said, there's nothing wrong with whatever I'm doing. I'm just keep doing what I'm doing. So what's
Right.
the issue there?
The very important question, and the best way to understand it is looking at what happens with people who smoke, right? So what if we asked ourselves to decide if cigarettes were bad for your health by only looking at lung cancer? And saying, okay, well, some people who smoke never develop lung cancer. Sure, they develop kidney cancer and prostate cancer and all kinds of neurological problems and osteoporosis, but it can't be bad because not everybody develops lung cancer. That's kind of where we're at. It's like it has to do with how does your body metabolize? How is your body impacted by these toxins? Right. So not everybody responds to toxins in the same way. And that's really the bottom line. And I look at obesity actually as a way of protecting. This is the metabolism making a choice to protect other cells in the body from these dangerous fats, because when people gain weight, what's happening is they are burning their own body fat less often. And that is a very reasonable kind of like response to the fact that burning body fat causes cellular damage. Right.
Okay. So if you burn PUFA made body fat, it can cause cellular damage.
It does. Yes.
So then so here's the weird thing. Well, when people have been eating PUFAs their whole life and they know they need to lose it, are they going to damage their body by losing that weight that's made of PUFA?
Well, yeah. I mean, that is why I wrote the book called The FatBurn Fix, because I found that even though intermittent fasting can be part of a healthy lifestyle, and the keto diet can be part of a healthy lifestyle, people who had gone down a certain metabolic path and gained weight and had certain kinds of metabolic damage couldn't do those things, and in fact would get worse when they did. And I was just speaking with somebody yesterday who was in this scenario, who had tried intermittent fasting, tried the keto diet, wasn't losing weight. His biomarkers were actually getting worse. He was feeling worse, and nothing was right. Nothing was working right, because he wasn't really ready to burn his body fat at the quantities that he was. And so we came up with a plan to fix that. And that's why I wrote the book, The FatBurn Fix, because I can only help one person at a time. It takes a long time, but it's all in the book. So, so people who have read the book carefully and applied the quiz that I have in there that is designed to help you sort out, are you okay yet with a keto diet? Are you okay with intermittent fasting? And hopefully your audience is familiar with those things, and I can, maybe we should talk about that if you don't think so. But those are very common tools that people are using now to improve their metabolic health. But even though they can be helpful, they can be harmful if your body is not in shape for doing those.
So you mentioned that the increase in fat as a response to eating PUFA, high levels of PUFA in your diet, is a defense mechanism that the body uses to prevent itself from being harmed as much by the PUFA consumption. Is that right?
Exactly. And what that means is that, when, I was trained calories in, calories out. And so people would come to my office and they would swear to me that like, I'm not eating any more than I did before, but I'm gaining weight and I can't lose it. I cut my calories in. And so doctors learn, okay, well, when you hear that, that means your patient's probably, in some sort of denial or just outright lying. But there's way more to it than that. And so what do we do though? Like what we do is we basically, we tell them, well, calories in, calories out. So we just repeat what they no doubt already know, which is basically you're just eating too much, right? And you don't need to go to a doctor's office to hear that. You don't want to go to a doctor's office to hear that because you've already heard that and you're looking for a deeper solution. And so it took me a while, like after I figured out, okay, yeah, so these healthier traditional fats, butter, don't cause heart attacks. It took me a while to come around to understanding the connection to obesity. And that's why it wasn't until 2017 or 2020 actually that the FatBurn fix finally came out. But that is that was really key, and it finally I think helped me understand the specific connection and what a really terrible conundrum people who are overweight and are seriously overweight, like where they have insulin resistance, prediabetes, diabetes, fatty liver, sleep apnea, complications of that overweight. They're really in a deep well of metabolic trouble. And to get them out of there, you can't just give them the standard advice, eat less. They're already hungry, eating too much. So you can't just have them eat less. It has to be a much more sophisticated program. So
because these PUFA fats, the body doesn't know how to use them for fuel, right?
That's correct. They can produce some energy for sure. They can produce energy, but it's at a cost. And that cost is called mitochondrial dysfunction. So mitochondria are the little chambers in your cells that produce energy in the form of ATP. For those folks out there who are muscle builders, I'm sure you know what ATP is. But the mitochondria that burn PUFA become damaged permanently in some cases. And so you have to create new mitochondria, and basically the cell can't function very well. And so you have to, you still get, even though you aren't a person who's going to develop overweight or obesity, you still get hungry more often. And so a lot of people are like grazers, and they're always grabbing something to snack on because they're really fueling themselves mostly with sugar to protect themselves from the PUFA. But they protect themselves from the PUFA to a lesser degree. So I find that people who are severely overweight actually are less likely to have autoimmune disease, less likely to have certain cancers, because I think that the PUFAs are driving a lot of autoimmune disease when the cells are forced to burn this stuff. They're not like fueling often enough with glucose.
Yeah. So it could be that someone who has been eating the standard American diet with a lot of PUFA, who is thin after decades of doing so, could be in worse shape health-wise than a person who's overweight eating the same amount of PUFA. Is that what?
Totally.
Is that, wow.
Yeah, and
so that flips everybody's paradigm, because everybody has been inundated with, if I'm thin, yeah, I probably got some problems going on, but that guy who's the fatty over there, that guy's in real worse shape than I am. And you're saying, no, it's not actually the case, especially when you're talking about the high consumption of PUFA that's in everything. And it's in all the restaurant foods. It's in the cooked nuts with oils, roasted nuts, and all these things. It's in so many things, including chicken and pork, which are fed corn and soy. So even people who are doing keto, like I did keto and I found it tremendously effective for me when I started in 2004. But then 2020, it's not as easy until I realized, wait a second, because I always knew, generally speaking, I'd heard vaguely vegetable oils are bad, but I didn't think they were I remember specifically years ago thinking, I've heard something bad about those things, but they can't be the real problem. It's carbs and sugar. And I've already sacrificed enough. I'm cutting out all these carbs and sugar. People are scarfing down biscuits every time I go to restaurants, and I'm just sitting there waiting for my meal. Please come, please come. I've had enough. I'm not sacrificing anymore. That's just something over there. I'm not dealing with that. Okay. And so, because I would eat ranch dressing and wings, and I was still losing weight. I'm like, well, that's obviously not what's causing the problem of weight gain. But then as I got older, and I still did the same keto style where I wasn't buying the oils necessarily, but I wasn't looking for it. I'd go to my favorite steak place, get a ribeye. I didn't know they were slathering it with soybean oil to make it buttery looking or whatever, So once I realized that, I said, okay, so let's start removing that out. And all of a sudden, I started losing weight like I was 18 or 20, like I did before. And I was like, okay, that's interesting, So
you really
people don't realize that hidden thing is the component that's driving this, right?
It's accelerating aging. It's really accelerating the process of dying. Wow. And so when you get away from those things, you do rejuvenate yourself. I mean, you really can reverse age yourself by getting these things out of your body. I've seen people with testosterone levels in the tank, like,
Mm.
under abnormals under 200, like in the 40s, and they would get it up to like 400 after not too long of doing this stuff. So the more you weigh, the kind of the longer it's going to take to really get to the point where you have to detoxify your body fat, and the more that you have, the longer the whole process is going to take. But fortunately, there's this weird thing I've noticed where people who are overweight, like a lot of times they're just so energetic and stuff, like they're okay with not losing weight, because they are just like, they've maintained their energy somehow, like their brain is able to get enough energy, or they're like their drive is energy, and that's why they were eating, right? So they're super energetic, and so they'll work with me very patiently for a while, where I'm not focusing on having them lose weight. I just want them to detoxify their body fat, and then they can lose weight. I like to do it in that order. And I know that's completely sacrilegious, because the standard weight loss doctor is taught and will teach that you have to lose weight quickly to get somebody motivated, right?
And sometimes when people hear, oh, wait a second, I don't have to cut back on the carbs immediately, they think, okay, that means I'm gonna perpetually keep eating them, you know what I mean, as like a crutch. Like, so that can go that way too, right? If you
Well,
right.
yeah, I'm glad you brought that. There's the kind of carbs, right? So what I teach people is what kind of carbohydrates are actually necessary for you if you are one of these folks in this later stage of metabolic damage. Because if you can't do keto, that means you do need carbohydrates, but you don't want the kind that will spike your blood sugar and insulin. So you just want the kind that don't do that. And so I teach people, like, what exactly, can you eat? For example, it would be something like sprouted grain bread. That's 100% sprouted grain, like Ezekiel bread, that kind of has to be kept in the freezer. Because that will not spike your blood sugar, will not spike your insulin, and it kind of dribbles out what your cells really need, which is a little bit of glucose, a little bit of extra glucose, so that your body, what their bodies are doing is really terrible when they're in this like more damaged metabolic state. They are taking protein and converting it into energy. They're taking protein, which is supposed to be, for building blocks and signaling and other very important stuff in the body.
But
and
carnivores and keto people tend to do that too, right? They gluconeogenesis. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. If you have too much protein, well, you're going to turn it into fat too, right? But if you're metabolically damaged, you're going to turn it into sugar. Or if you're doing like almost zero carb, you will turn it into sugar.
Is
and
that
it's not always,
do you think that's not good for people to do zero carb, or because of that? Or
well, it's no, I don't think that, but it's just not necessary, right? So if you enjoy your a little bit of like bread or beans or vegetables, right? I mean, come on now, life without vegetables like garlic and onions and mushrooms seems tragic. A
yeah,
steak without those things, come on.
yeah.
But and I mean, you can't even make a good bone stock without vegetables. So I don't say that it's unhealthy to do like a carnivore diet, although for some people who are more metabolically damaged, I think perhaps it is. But for somebody who's healthy, a carnivore diet is a good option. It's just kind of like, it's an elimination diet. I don't think anyone is really going to stay on it very long.
Yeah. Yeah. So the key. So now, can people lose weight while still eating carbohydrates, though? Right? How are they burning fat if they're running some of that glucose for fuel? How do they get that? How do they? Because Tucker Goodrich was telling me, he was saying that the body prefers to burn PUFA, like it prefers to burn ethanol. It wants to get rid of these toxic things. So
Correct.
How does that fit into this?
So that's why some people gain weight, because let's say you have 30% PUFAs in your body fat. Those PUFAs are going to be released in a higher concentration than 30%, because that's just how it is. The body has been because it's normally such a minority fat in our body fat. The way the body releases it, the way the body stores it, means that it has to be released in preference. Otherwise, you might be deficient, right? So the body preferentially, we do need these PUFAs. We need them for brain building. We need them for signaling. And so if you only have 2% in your body fat, well, your body fat better darn well offer that 2% up. Be sure to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that it is preferentially released also. So it's preferentially released to burn, and it gets into the mitochondria very easily because it's wiggly and it just doesn't need special transport. It just slimes itself right in there. And so, so that's how you burn it. It's not like the body wants it. It's just that that's the by nature of it. And yes, so your poor mitochondria will be forced to burn those things and damage themselves usually in the process, and damage your cells a little bit. So your cells are just going to be less functional, but that's how you lose weight. So how do you lose weight safely without damaging yourself? If you've gotten to a certain point with metabolic damage, I don't want you to lose weight. I want you to detoxify your body fat. And that's more of a severe state, but a lot of people are there. I'd say a good 30% of the people that I work with are in that severe state where they really can't focus on weight loss. They will lose weight because they're going to have more energy. They're going to be burning more calories. They're going to be reaching for snacks less. But I don't want them to focus on that as their goal. They're just simply not ready for it. It's just like if you are, I want to run a marathon one day. And I would be a really bad coach if I said, okay, well, if you want to run a marathon, that's 26 miles. So get out there tomorrow and run 26 miles. Yeah, no, they haven't run a day in their lives. They're not ready for that. Very few people could handle that. There are going to be a minority of like genetically blessed, but that's not how it works when you're metabolically damaged.
Wow. So, and so your key again is not primarily dramatic weight loss immediately, but rather just switching the body to replace the PUFA fat with healthy fat, right? Saturated and monounsaturated.
Correct. Yeah.
Which of the two fats, saturated and monounsaturated, does the body prefer to consume? Do you have information on that?
Yeah, it's a really interesting answer. It's actually monounsaturated fat. And so that means so saturated fat is like a straight chain and there's no kinks in it. And it's a little bit energetically more difficult to start breaking up and using as fuel. Having that monounsaturated means there's a double bond, which causes a kink. And that actually is a great place to break the fat in half. And that when you do that in your cells, you're actually making it so that those two halves, they get right into the mitochondria faster than saturated fat. So it is the preferred fuel. And I think that's why when we biopsy people's body fat, there's almost always more monounsaturated fat than there is saturated fat, because the body stores it that way on purpose. So when we eat carbohydrates and we eat too much protein, if we eat too much of those two macros, we're going to store them as fat. But the difference is that our bodies can control exactly the composition of that kind of fat that we store them, as opposed to when we eat the PUFAs, we have no choice but to store it as PUFA. We can't de-PUFAfy a PUFA. Except for by burning it for energy. So we can't store it as anything other than a PUFA. But when we eat carbs to excess, we can still turn it into saturated fat or monounsaturated fat to the exact degree that our body fat deems best at the moment. So that's that's kind of added fuel to the fire of all these high carb folks, right? Because a lot of people actually do feel better when they go on a very low fat, therefore high carb diet, because now they're able to store their body fat in a way that's healthier, and you're still detoxifying your body fat if you're going very low fat, right? Because you're still eating less PUFA.
So your body will get rid of the PUFA while doing the high.
Even on a high carb diet,
or it's still burning it, just like you
still burn it,
but it's not burning it at the same amount, at the same speed. Is that right? Or
it can. See, this is the thing where folks get confused about like fat. Like they think that like a keto diet somehow magically impacts their metabolism, so they will burn more body fat. But it's not really like that. And it really has to do with your response to hunger. And so some people just have a much better natural calorie thermostat. And these are the people that do really well on a low fat diet because they can naturally modulate. So I've had enough carb that I've gotten my blood sugar where it needs to go for a little while. I'm not going to keep on eating, right? And people that can't do that will overeat. And so those are people that end up doing better on a like a beginner keto diet. And by which I mean, like, they're not thinking about the PUFAs. They're just focusing on carbs, like, for a little while, as long as they're not metabolically damaged beyond a certain point. So you were young and it worked well for you. You were metabolically intact, but so you could do a keto diet. You probably did better on that than you would on a low fat diet. Just some people do better on low fat versus low carb as a way of getting away from PUFA. But why not just jump to the chase, get away from PUFA?
Yeah, so the bottom line is you're trying to have a broad net here and say, look, if you need to do low fat, high carb, or low carb, the number one scapegoat in all of this is the PUFAs. Get those out of the body and never, in terms of that, obviously you can have healthy forms of this PUFA, but that's more of the natural products that you've talked about a little bit.
Yeah. So like coming from a bottle is very different than coming from a walnut, but still too much is too much. And so once you get to a certain point, you do want to be careful about even the whole food-based PUFAs.
And you want to probably tell people to steer clear from traditional chicken and pork, right? That are fed these corn and soy, right? Because I've heard that has a high amount of PUFA in their fat and skin and stuff, right?
Yes, but still, I mean, so yes, it would be definitely ideal to be pasture raised, but I mean, if your choice is eat nothing but steak and hate your life, I mean, steak's great, but after a while you want some other options. So I'd never want anybody to feel like they're on an unsustainable diet. And I think the balance of the benefits and the harms there, go ahead and have your factory chicken if that's all you can get your hands on. And that's what you're used to cooking, whatever. We live from a very far from ideal world. And that's just the reality. But I'm not going to say that you can't eat chicken, because even though there is a bit more in the fat of the chicken, a bit more of the unhealthy fatty acids, when the chicken just in general has more PUFA than cows, but especially when it's grain fed, but still it's way different than corn oil, and you're getting a lot of protein, you're getting collagen if you're eating the fat of the chicken, because that means you're probably eating the chicken skin, and the chicken skin has nutrients that you don't get from muscle meat. That's a whole other that's kind of like the focus of my first book, which is like, what are the things that people did that we don't do anymore that we should be doing? And one of them was using animal skin and cooking meat on the bone and making bone stocks and bone broths to help keep their connective tissue as healthy as can be.
I wanted to go back to saturated fat for a moment, because I've heard, some people do MCT oil, which is super high octane coconut oil, saturated fat. I've talked to Brad Marshall, who's another big person who criticizes PUFAs and trying to experiment. He's famous for the croissant diet. I don't know if you've heard of that, where he's eating croissants and red wine, and just as an experiment to demonstrate that you can have a high carb diet. Mm-hmm. And he was apparently losing a massive amount of belly fat fast because he was loading it up with stearic acid. But this is a fat. Have you looked into this? Does this help with weight loss, or is this something that, again, is kind of misunderstood?
Yeah, so much is misunderstood, because if they're not controlling for the amount of PUFA before and during the diet, then they're missing the big picture. They're really missing the forest for the trees. I mean, there may be some minimal difference between like a 16 carbon saturated fat and an 18 carbon saturated fat and a 20, but I mean, that's really grasping at straws to try to come up with a way to make that a radical part of your lifestyle. It doesn't seem relevant to me. The first thing is, hey, let's look at this forest of highly toxic, unstable polyunsaturated fatty acid, and then let's just look at what people used to eat and kind of go back to that as much as we possibly can. Mm-hmm.
So we've talked about obesity and and heart health as relates to PUFA. Now, how does can we get briefly into, I know it's a huge topic, but I've interviewed Dr. Thomas Seyfried about what he's doing using ketosis, therapeutic ketosis, and some other drugs to help people with cancer, right?
Yes.
And he's worked with different labs around the world. Is that, I've wondered, at first, again, I thought it was primarily maybe the reduction of the carbs and sugar that was the big effect there. But then when you think about people doing keto, they're probably also eliminating a lot of the PUFA that's found in the junk food. And so maybe that's also driving some of the results that they're seeing in their studies in this field.
I think it's primarily driving the results, because to try to explain that someone without diabetes gets cancer because of insulin makes no sense to me. So if you don't have diabetes or pre-diabetes or even really extreme insulin resistance, then your insulin levels aren't going to be that high. I mean, insulin is a hormone, so we have less than a gram of it in our entire body, even if we're severely, I'm just making that number up, but it's not very much. I mean, we have nanogram amounts in our bloodstream, and a nanogram is a billionth of a gram. So we don't have very much insulin. And so to try to say somehow that this hormone insulin is responsible for causing cancer, for causing the mitochondrial dysfunction, for causing all the things that are involved in the disaster, the Titanic of a disaster that cancer is. Many, many things have to have gone wrong inside a cell. Doesn't make sense that it's all insulin, because like I said, sugar is safely stored in your body fat as saturated and monounsaturated. So even if your diet is very high in sugar, until you ultimately develop chronically high blood sugars and chronically, chronic insulin resistance, your blood sugar levels are going to be normal. So you're not even exposing yourself to.
So what, I mean, this is again a strange hypothetical, but I'm trying to visualize this for folks, the gravity of what we're talking about. So if we could have had, remaking history from the last century in America, and we could have removed every, vegetable oil based PUFA part of the diet, but everybody else ate the same exact stuff, the same amount of sugar. Now, obviously, right, a lot of that sugar carb is driven by the PUFA that you're talking about. It makes you hungry for this because
Right.
your cells need fuel. So that's a factor. But if we could just, in a hypothetical, have removed all the PUFA unnatural consumption of the last century, but kept the processed flours and the grains and the sugar levels exactly where they were. Everybody ate the same amount of ice cream and whatever, but they didn't have any of the PUFA stuff, the canola, the soybean, the corn, all this. What would that have looked like? Would it have been a 10% reduction, and the obesity epidemic would have been for cancer and heart disease? I know we can't put a number on it. I'm just trying to visualize the gravity of this factor here.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting hypothetical question. And the slice of the pie that we're talking about is like a third, right? So if we just replace that third of the pie that right now comes from seed oils with healthy fats, where would we be right now? And my estimation is it's majority of our diseases wouldn't exist. I mean, we still would have relative malnutrition, because when you're getting a third of your daily calories from empty calorie refined sugars and carbohydrates, refined sugars and flours, are basically, there's no nutrition in them. You're a setup for malnutrition, and you may not be getting enough protein. You may not be getting enough of a variety of vitamins and minerals. But let's say that you were paying attention to your macros and you made sure to get enough protein, and you were taking a multivitamin. You were paying attention to these micronutrients, and really the switch was in macros. I would say probably 95% of the disease. We would have some overweight people, but when I was
different looking overweight.
yes, it would be different looking. They wouldn't be that unhealthy, honestly, because obesity was not associated with early mortality until I think it was like it was the early 2000s. They finally found that people who were overweight were at higher risk of heart attacks, but they hadn't been for a long time. And if you think about the history of the human body fat was not overloaded with PUFAs until like the 70s or 80s. And it takes a while to develop arteriosclerosis and cancer and all these other diseases. So
But Ansel Keys was out there butchering and attacking saturated fat before that, right? So what was causing the increase in heart disease that he was scapegoating onto saturated fat if it didn't really take off into the 70s, the PUFA stuff?
Oh, yes. So, well, there was, so at that point in time when Ansel Keys was studying, and he was studying other countries too. So
Okay.
he was studying countries where there really wasn't very much PUFA in some cases, and in some there had been quite a bit. But really what was actually happening in the 1950s and 60s is that men were smoking like chimneys. Okay. Our president,
Okay. Okay.
Eisenhower, was a
Yeah.
4-pack per day smoker, and that
Wow.
was on a good day.
So that was the issue at the time. It
Yes.
wasn't
And
PUFA, it was the smoking too much.
it was the smoking. Yes. And right. So really, Ansel Keys, he did a lot of manipulation with statistics to make it look like saturated fat was causing heart attacks. And a lot of folks in this space say, well, what was really causing heart attacks at the time was sugar, but absolutely not. What was really causing heart attacks at the time was cigarette smoking.
What about sedentary lifestyle? That's another common scapegoat for all these diseases. Was that the problem? Too much sedentary lifestyle?
Well, in 1950, a sedentary lifestyle is very different than a sedentary lifestyle in 2020. I mean,
Yeah.
they were relatively active compared to us
Yeah,
because
they still had to walk out the door to get their milk, right? They didn't have to sit at Amazon. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, TV wasn't that interesting, so you
Yeah.
had to do gardening, and I mean, we've really taken sedentary lifestyle to the limit in the past 50 years, and so now it's a different thing, and part of it also is driven by PUFA because there was a fascinating study that showed that people who eat more corn oil sit more often. They are less inclined to be active. And this makes perfect sense if you think about that this corn oil and have more PUFA in their diet, and therefore their body fat. They are producing less energy in their mitochondria. So they have less energy. So they're going to want to burn energy less often. So they're just going to feel lazier. They're going to be like lazy, and they're going to take responsibility for that. They're going to say, oh, I just don't like exercising, but it's not you, it's your body fat. It's the PUFAs.
Wow. Now, has there been any evidence that the food companies that have been putting these vegetable oils in so many products know what they're doing to our bodies? They know they're causing obesity and oxidative damage. They know they're causing carcinogenic effects, and yet they're still putting it in. Is there any evidence that they're knowingly putting these toxic stuff into our food, even though they know the data shows that this is not good for humans to consume?
I think that they know that these are toxic. They have the potential to hurt people because when you go to the seed oil nerds, there's a society for seed oil nerds. There's several of them, and one that I've attended multiple meetings of is called the American Oil Chemists Society. And I recently attended a lecture where this award-winning, like world famous chemist said, hey, we all have been trying for 150 years to find ways to make seed oils safe for human consumption, meaning that they don't oxidize, they don't have toxins in them when you heat them, which of course you do when you're cooking with them, but also like when you're refining them. So they come out of the factory with toxins. And his lecture basically said, well, we've tried this, we've tried antioxidants, we've tried removing oxygen and using nitrogen, and it really doesn't work. Nothing works very well, but here's some new exciting avenues of research that we're going to pursue. And at the end of that lecture, we had the opportunity to ask questions. So of course I couldn't resist. And my question was the first one. So I asked, well, if these seed oils are so difficult to make safe for human consumption, why can't we just go ahead? Why don't you guys just recommend going back to tallow and lard, right? So kind of a loaded question. And he handled it with really like a British aplomb. I think he was British or working in Oxford or something. Anyway, very suavely just said, well, we would love to actually make that recommendation, but you come up against the dietary guidelines for America when you do that, which is the government guidelines, and companies, schools and many industries they have to follow these guidelines or they don't get money. And the dietary guidelines for America come from the American Heart Association. So it comes down to the American Heart Association standing in the way of people being healthy. And guess what? Guess who was the man that was in charge of the nutrition in the American Heart Association when they first became a company or a corporation, the American Heart Association, that accepted industry donations? Do you want to guess? I bet you know the answer.
Is that Ansel Keys, right?
Yeah, bing, bing, bing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, it comes down to Ansel Keys. And so this is why I'm always like saying, I do not believe Ansel Keys was like a misguided scientist who really cared. I think he was a egomaniac who was mostly interested in his own pursuing his own very ambitious ambitions of becoming remembered for solving the mystery of heart attacks, regardless of whether or not he actually solved it, which he ironically made worse. Because now heart attacks had been on the decline for a while because people were smoking less. And now that we're eating so much seed oil and it's in our body fat, heart attacks are again on the rise. So the American Heart Association had declared victory, and they were saying that heart attacks aren't going to be happening anymore in 2010, but they are, are now kind of, well, like they would be eating their words if they had any, but they just are pretending they never said that. So
yeah. So the seed oils cause the same carcinogen that cigarettes do in the body, right?
Yeah. So cigarettes produce something called acrylamide, and seed oils break down into something called acrylamide. And cigarettes also have many toxins, right? So when you burn something, you create a lot of little bad things. And we study each of them. Scientists have to study them one at a time, because that's what science does, is it looks at it one at a time, but that doesn't mean like it's the most important or the only one. So vegetable oils too have multiple different compounds that are toxic when you buy them and when you cook with them. And acrylamide is one, but there's all kinds of others. There's some that are so fleeting that we didn't even understand that they existed until recently, until our technology was capable of detecting them. But the more fleeting they are, actually, the more damaging they are, because that means they're more energetic, and energy out of control is damaging. That's why radiation kills us, because it's energy out of control, high energy out of control.
Do you think that just like the tobacco industry got sued, that there should be lawsuits, class action lawsuits for people to require these products and restaurants to have the skull and crossbones symbol? This is toxic, as you on the French fry container.
I think that's the only way anything's really going to change. That's the only way a lot of things change in this country, is it has to become an issue of money.
Lawsuits. Wow, this is so fascinating. I have so many more questions, but I want to let you go for now. So we'll have to leave it off as a cliffhanger. I want to know more about connections to seed oils and autism. I want to know more about connections to seed oil consumption and mood issues, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia. I've interviewed Dr. Chris Palmer, a Harvard psychiatrist, who's using, again, therapeutic ketosis with schizophrenia patients. And they're saying after a few months of going on keto, they're saying, doctor, I don't hear the voices. And they have to stay on the diet. As long as they do, they're having subsided results. And I wonder if that too is a reduction in seed oils more than the carb and sugar issue. I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there, but I think there's a lot more to discuss.
There is a lot more to discuss.
So we'll leave it off there. And I want folks in the meantime to go to drcate.com. That's Kate with a C.com, drcate.com, and check out the book, The FatBurn Fix, which I have started to read and really enjoy. And I'm looking forward to doing more discussions in the future.
Thank you so much for having me on, David. This has been fun talking with you.
Very good. And we'll talk soon.